Ladies and gentlemen, if you could just take your seats, we're about to get started. Now, just before we start, the gentleman's toilet is over there, the lady's toilet is over there, and if for some reason we have to evacuate the building, obviously you go out there and we'll assemble in the car park. Now, you know there's something wrong when people cancel an election to ram through a works program and then send you a bill for $1 billion. So tonight, John Robson and myself are going to make the case against the long-term plan, why it must be repealed and replaced to avoid a 164% rate increase. Now, my name is Garth Mathieson. I'm a Mount Maunganui ward candidate in the upcoming Tauranga City Council election. John is a mayoral candidate and a Bethlehem ward candidate in the upcoming election. We've got a smaller crowd than we've had before, but that doesn't matter. We'll give you the whole presentation, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Now, I'm going to discuss the evidence that shows that the commissioners have been working in the interests of a small group of people, not the general public, in formulating the Tauranga City Council long-term plan. I'll discuss the works program that eventually evolved into a key component of the long-term plan. I'll look at the origin of the works program. Now, the origin is important because it will assist you in understanding who the commissioners have been working for, and it is not you, the general public, who pay rates. I'll look at the appointment of the commissioners, and then I'm going to look at the commissioners' supporters along with the commissioners who were instrumental in persuading the Minister of Local Government to cancel the 2022 Tauranga City Council election and extend the commissioners' terms so they could ram through the works program. Now, when I finish, John is going to get up and he's going to talk to you about the consequences, the financial consequences in particular, of the long-term plan. Okay, so the origin or the genesis of the works program, and it's important to understand this so you can understand the motive for the cancellation of the 2022 election. So back in on the 6th of June 2015, an article appeared in the Bay of Plenty Times and was headed up, Amenities Group has its heart in the city. Now, what the Amenities Group was a selection of, or a group of prominent business people in the city who wanted to redevelop the CBD on the Te Papa Peninsula. Now, I have taken out the important parts of that article and put them into a slide. So who was the Civic Amenities Group? Well, they were led by Paul Adams, a prominent developer in this city. The membership of the Civic Amenities Group included Tom Roper of Zariba Holdings, Neil Craig of Craig's Investment Partners, Peter Farmer of Farmer Motor Group, Bill Holland of Holland Beckett, Graham Horsley of Vital Health Care Property, Richard Cashmore of Realty Service, Eves and Bailey's Real Estate, and Michael Smith of Quayside Holdings, Port of Tauranga. Now, what is it that they wanted? Well, they wanted a redevelopment of the Te Papa CBD, and they proposed sports, arts, cultural amenities, and the projects also included a museum and a 15,000 seat stadium at the Tauranga Domain. Pretty much what is happening in the CBD now. Now, cost, and I quote from the newspaper article, "The group's plan will not force an increase in rates," unquote. Alternative funding was to be from government and corporate grants, trust allocations, private bequests, public-private partnerships and civic bond issues. But that funding has never eventuated. What happened? Well, we move on to the 15th of September 2015. And those of you who understand or have a knowledge of military history, you'll know that the 6th of June, the previous article, was D-Day, and the 15th of September 2015 is the Battle of Britain Day. Now, the group's chairman, Paul Adams, reported to the paper that the group had briefed the Tauranga City Council on a package of proposed civic infrastructure projects, including the development of a stadium with the capacity of about 15,000. I quote Mr. Adams, "The Civic Amenities Group has presented a proposal to the elected members and is looking forward to working collaboratively with Tauranga City Council in further costing, then developing, funding and construction of a boutique stadium," end quote. I always wondered when I read the business case for the stadium where this term, the boutique stadium, came from. Now we know. Now the initial estimated cost of the stadium was 25 million. The cost now is $280 million. Now, at the time, the democratically elected council, in my opinion wisely, did not take up this proposal. In 2019 there was an election and the council was elected, and as everybody in the room will know, there were multiple code of conduct complaints, and the council itself appointed a review and observer team to report on the issues and help the council through the problems that they had. Now, the review team found that the council was dysfunctional because there was a breakdown in relationships between the mayor and councillors and other councillors. This only begs the question, why was there a breakdown in key relationships? Now, when you go through the report, there are multiple reasons given, but in my opinion, the answer was because a majority of the councillors did not agree with the work program. And on the 16th of November 2020, the observer team recommended that the Minister of Local Government appoint a Crown Observer to assist the council. Yet just only a week later, for some unknown reason, the observer team announced it had changed its mind and recommended the appointment of commissioners. Now, the commissioners were appointed on the 5th of February 2021 to govern Tauranga from 9 February 2021 until local government elections in October of 2022, and that was gazetted. They had to develop a long-term plan and develop an exit plan. And the exit plan, and subsequently the long-term plan as well, included the works program. The exit plan was dated the 25th of November 2021 and is the first document that I know of where the commissioners asked the government to cancel the 2022 election and extend the term of the commissioners. Now, for those supporters of the commissioners who wanted the works program to go through, there was a problem, and that was time. There was not enough time to get the works program into the long-term plan before the election in October of 2022. There was simply not enough time. So some of them started writing to the Minister of Local Government and asking that the election of 2022 be cancelled and the terms of the commissions extended. And we'll have a look at some of these letters shortly. Now, the first two letters were on the 12th of September 2021, and they were from unknown individuals, despite my best attempts to get the Ombudsman to rule that their names should be released, because I believe the public have a right to know all the names of the people and organisations who are instrumental in taking away your right to vote. The Ombudsman has ruled against me in respect of individuals. So those two individuals' names remain unknown. Now, on the 1st of October 2021, the New Zealand Property Council wrote to the Minister requesting that the 2022 election be cancelled and the term of the Ministers extended. It is very important to note that Scott Adams was the Director of Caris Corporation and at the time President of the Urban Task Force, was a member of the Central Committee of the New Zealand Property Council. And the Central Committee is specifically referred to in this letter. And in fact, this letter from New Zealand Property Council is very, very similar to the letter from the Urban Task Force, which was written on the 4th of October 2021 and sent to the Minister and signed by Scott Adams, who was the President of the Urban Task Force at that time. Then on the 17th of November 2021, Ngā Potikia Kamapahori Trust wrote to the Minister, request extension of the term of the Commissioners and the cancellation of the election. On 23 November 2021, an unknown individual wrote to the Minister. Then on the 25th of November 2021, as I've already mentioned, the exit plan was signed and sent to the Minister. And as far as I'm aware, that's the first document that the Commissioners have asked for the cancellation of the 2022 election. So you can see before the Commissioners asked the Minister, we have 5 individuals and organisations that have done so. Then on the 18th of December 2021, Mary Dillon wrote to the Minister requesting the cancellation of the election. And on 21 December 2021, Social Link wrote to the Minister requesting the cancellation of the 2022 election. Now, before we move on to look at these particular letters, or some of these letters, it's important to remember that these people and organisations are writing to the Minister of Local Government asking for your right to vote in the 2022 election be cancelled and the term of the Commissioners extended so they can ram through a works program that they want you, the public, to pay for. They're advocating for your right to vote to be cancelled. They don't trust you because you might elect the wrong people, and their correspondence says that. Now, I find that absolutely appalling. They don't respect you, the general public. They know what's best for you. They just want your money. So let's have a look now at some of the correspondence. So the first document is, and I've put up this document first, which is the Property Council letter, and you'll see it's dated 1 October 2021. It's signed at the bottom by 2 people. Their names are not clear, but one of them is Leonie Freeman. I'm not sure who the other person is. Now, what I've done is taken the important parts of that letter and put it in to this slide, which I want to read to you. The timing of the appointment prior to the long-term plan 2021-2031 was particularly crucial as Tauranga City Council had to address substantial infrastructure and funding challenges. However, we are concerned that the Council returned to an elected membership in October 2022. There is a risk that the public could prematurely install elected members once again, unable to navigate the intricacies of decades of local underinvestment, thereby likely undoing all the Commissioner's good work to date. Given all the great work and the progress that has been made to date by the Commissioners, we ask you to reappoint the current Commissioners beyond October 2022 for another 3-year term. And this time it is expected that the long-term infrastructure projects, e.g. the Te Papa multimodal corridor, will be well under development. It will help ensure that Tauranga residents are more attuned to the citywide benefits that come with investment in infrastructure and growth. Now, in the meantime, Property Council is committed to the betterment of Tauranga and the Western Bay sub-region and will continue to advocate for growth-related property activities. So what they're saying is that you, the people, cannot be trusted to elect the right people who will support the projects that they want, but they want you, the people, to pay for it. Let's carry on. Now, this is the Urban Task Force letter, again addressed to the Honourable Nania Mahuta, Minister of Local Government. You'll see it's signed by Scott Adams, the President of the Urban Task Force. And it says on an attachment that the Urban Task Force advocates on behalf of local property industry in the Bay of Plenty region. So it's a property advocacy lobby group. Now, I have put the relevant parts of Mr. Adams' letter into a slide, which I will read. and this is important. Firstly, we would like to commend you and Cabinet on your decision to appoint commissioners. The timing of this appointment was critical with respect to the 2021-2031 long-term plan. This is arguably Tauranga City Council's most important LTP ever, with complex and challenging decisions to be made on housing, infrastructure, civil amenity and social funding. The UTF is highly concerned about the pending Commission's transition strategy. We believe there is significant risk that the local body elections in October 2022 could see a quorum of the same ex-councillors re-elected. This group of ex-councillors has continued decades of poor governance, resulting in chronic underinvestment. Well, that's his opinion. Now, we understand that they have strategies to reverse the decisions made by the commissioners, i.e. rates freezes across their 2022-2024 term. It is our view that the commissioners need to be reappointed beyond October 2022 and for a full 3-year term. During this term, it is expected that long-term infrastructure projects such as the Te Papa multimodal corridor, together with the opening of land tracks complete with the required trunk infrastructure, will be prevalent in Tauranga, and residents will be more attuned to the citywide benefits derived from infrastructure investment at this more strategic level. As I said before, the letter is very similar to that of the New Zealand Property Council, and the reason for that is Scott Adams. That letter from the New Zealand Property Council was written on his behalf. That is obvious. So Scott Adams is also saying that you, the people, can't be trusted to elect the right people, and therefore your vote should be cancelled. But again, he wants you to pay for the works program. Then we have a letter from Ngā Potiki Tamapahori Trust. From Peter Stokes has signed it. It's a short letter, and again it advocates for the cancellation of the 2022 election and the extension of the Commissioner's terms. Then there's a letter from Mary Dillon. Now Mary Dillon, as you know, or most of you will know, is a former Deputy Mayor of the city and also a long-term councillor. She also advocates for the cancellation of the 2022 election and the extension of the Commissioner's terms. You would think that somebody who had benefited so greatly from the democratic process would have a bit more respect for it than she does. And then there's a letter, or an email I should say, from Social Link. Now, I believe they just must have been tapped on the shoulder to do this. I can't imagine why Social Link would be writing a letter to the Minister of Local Government asking for an election to be cancelled. Now, in addition to those letters, there was also some secret meetings held between the government and business and iwi leaders. But there were allegedly no records kept of who attended. Now, while the Ombudsman accepted this, I did not, and I argued strongly with the Ombudsman about this, but in the end he has accepted that there was no records kept of these secret meetings, the purpose of which was to cancel the 2022 election. Then the Commissioner sent the Minister a public report dated 31 December 2021 requesting that the 2022 election be delayed and held in October 2023, which would allow the significant work programs to be progressed. The significant work programs to be progressed. Now, in fact, the election was not delayed, it was actually cancelled. When we go back into the same election cycle as the rest of the country in 2028, we will always be one election down on what the rest of the country had. Let's have a look at what the Commissioners actually said in their report of 31 December 2021. And I will read part of it. Concerns continue to be raised with us through our community engagement activities about the possibility that dysfunctional governance could again impact the future effectiveness of an elected council. We have assessed the perceived risk of that scenario to Council's work program as defined through the 2021-31 long-term plan. Activities and capability, and we believe the risks involved can best be managed by delaying the city's local government elections by 1 year until October 2023 and appointing a Crown Manager to oversee council governance through until the next scheduled local government elections in 2025. Such an approach would allow the significant work programs required to address the city's growth issues in infrastructure and community facility deficits, and the funding and financing arrangements required to support them, to be further progressed. A Crown Manager will also give the community assurance that the decisions they have supported through the last LTP process could not be readily reversed by a factionalised elected council. So, that letter could have been written by, or that document could have been written by Scott Adams, but it was written by the commissioners, and they could have also written the letter that he wrote. Such is the similarity. So what they are saying also is that you, the people, they want your right to vote to be cancelled just in case you elect the wrong people. But as I said, they want you to pay for everything. Now at this stage, 31st of December 2021, there have been no objections from the public to the cancellation of the 2022 election. Because of course the public doesn't know anything about it. Now, as the matter became public, people began to object to the cancellation of the election, and it became public in early 2022. And there were some people also who were in support of the Commission as well. So, the City Council elections, scheduled for 8 October 2022, were cancelled, and the Commissioners' terms were extended. And they were appointed on 21 April 2022 to govern Tauranga from the 22nd of April 2022 until elections now. And that was gazetted. Now this cancellation was done without any prior notice or consultation with you, the people, the ratepayers of the city. Our right to vote was cancelled, but we still have to pay for the work programs the Commissioners and their very group of supporters want. Pay but no say. Taxation without representation. Now I want to draw everything together now by looking at a government document. This sets out the government, the minister's reasons for the cancellation of the election, and you will see that the individuals and the organisations and the commissioners were all instrumental in the cancellation of the election and the reappointment of the commissioners to govern Tauranga. I'll read through these paragraphs, and they're taken from the Department of Internal Affairs briefing for the Honourable Nania Mahuta Exit Plan 11 February 2022, paragraphs 18 to 20. The Commission has analysed its achievements and believes there is a real risk that the work program may be undermined by the return of elected councillors who have historically tended to support conservative rate increases, leading to an inability to fund new growth. In particular, the Commission believes that under a return to elected democracy, a change in strategic direction may jeopardise relationships the Commission has established with public and private funding contributors. This would result in an inability to deliver on planned projects both within Tauranga City and across the wider region. The Department also notes that further intervention through the retention of a Commission is strongly supported by local iwi and business leaders. And I just interrupt there for a moment to say, well, I count one iwi leader and one business leader within the Tauranga region. The Department is aware of a number of ministerials from members of the Tauranga community noting their support for the decision to appoint commissioners and requesting that a commission is retained at the council beyond October 2022. Anecdotally, the Department has also received positive feedback from other individuals, such as Bay of Plenty Regional Council staff and private individuals in the Tauranga community. So, the Minister has brought into the arguments put forward by a handful of people, really, just a handful of people, and cancel an election based on what they want, and taken away your right to vote, but you, as I say, have got to pay for what they want. Now, on the 11th of May 2023, Kieran McAnulty, when he was visiting this city, was interviewed by Sun Live, and he said that, quote, "The decision to appoint the Commission until July 2024 was made following careful consideration of the Commission's exit plan, feedback from business and community leaders." So the point is, all those individuals, and it's not meant to, those few individuals and those few organisations and the commissioners were instrumental in cancelling election. A handful of people and groups. So I want to conclude then by saying the works program. Now that's evolved now from what it was in 2015, and it's become a key component of the city's long-term plan. As you'll be aware, the other 7 geographical wards are actually being robbed of money to fund the development that's going on in the CBD, and John will talk more about that. They've been robbed of the money. There's about $1 billion+ being spent on one ward at the expense of all the other wards. If you look at the main road that runs through the city, which comes off State Highway 2, down State Highway 29, where they join at Tauranga, then they come around to Takitumu Drive, cross the bridge, down Hewlett's Road, turn right into Monganui Road, and then join up with the Southern Expressway. In addition to that, there's a road called Totara Street, which is outside the biggest, most important port in this country. Totara Street has lights that don't work. It has a sinkhole that's never properly fixed. It has flooding. It flooded on Sunday recently when I was driving along it. Fortunately, it was a Sunday because I had to cross right over the other side to get around the flood, down by the Hewlett's Road end. Now, the council were going to put in $291 million on Hewlett's Road and Totara Street upgrade. They've reduced that to $38 million while continuing to prioritise Cameron Road and the CBD. Now, Cameron Road has had, and it's not the most important road in the city now, it's not the most important road in the city at all. And yet that has had a huge sum of money spent on it and to be spent on it. Stage 1 of Cameron Road was originally to cost $40 million and it's now cost $110 million. Stage 2 was to cost $45 million and now it's expected to cost $220 million. So all the point I'm trying to make here, and I've just given you one example, is all the other wards are actually being robbed of money for this works program in the Te Papa CBD. So the 2022 election was cancelled and your right to vote denied, so few people could have their way and ram through a works program which you have to pay for. Now, in my opinion, the evidence and the timeline clearly shows that Ann Tolley and the commissioners have been working for Scott Adams and the Urban Task Force, not you. They certainly have no respect for you. As I've repeatedly said, they need you to pay. On the 19th of April 2024, the Bay of Plenty Times reported Scott Adams saying that the Urban Task Force supported the Commissioner's decision, and it was a secret request to the Minister of Local Government to appoint a Crown Manager to oversee the new council elect in 2024. Mr Adams was quoted as saying it was critical, and I quote, "Voters learn from mistakes and vote in the right people," end quote. Now that's a threat. Who does he think he is? So how can you help yourself? Well, you need to vote for people who are going to repeal and replace the long-term plan. And John and I certainly, we're standing on that platform. We believe that's the most important issue facing the city at the moment. If the long-term plan is not repealed and replaced, and the works program cancelled as much as possible, then that works program and the long-term plan are going to become a bottomless financial pit. In my opinion, hundreds of millions of dollars are being wasted on the Te Papa Peninsula because the problem there was wrongly analysed by the commissioners. Ann Tolley has bought into Scott Adams' argument that previous council underinvestment was the problem. Well, that's completely wrong. The truth is that the free market ruled on the Te Papa Peninsula, and there's no longer a demand for a large CBD. Technology, geography, and ward shopping centres made the Tauranga CBD redundant, and no matter how much money is poured into the Tauranga CBD, nothing will change this fact. And it is essential that we take the control of the city back off the Urban Task Force led by Scott Adams and put it in the hands of community-minded people to stop this wastage of funds and put the city on the right direction and carry out essential projects that need to be carried out and save the ratepayers from 164% rate increase over the next 10 years and the city debt increasing from $1 billion to $3 billion over the next 10 years. So now John's going to talk about the financial cost, but just before I finish, I want you to think about the human cost. Think about the retailers of Cameron Road and the Te Papa CBD, people who have been forced to close their businesses, people who have had to move. I had a gentleman ring me up from the Tauranga CBD, and he said he'd had a business there for many decades. He was in a fortunate position because he had the money to move, but it was going to cost him $500,000 to move. He was only getting, I can't remember, I think it was something like 13 or 14 people in the door a day, and that wasn't enough. There have been real victims of the Commissioner's reign. There will still be more victims because of what they've done, but it is important, as I said, that we elect people who are going to change that plan, take the city back from the Urban Task Force, and produce a far better plan that is both sensible and affordable. Thank you. There'll just be a short interlude while John and I change over, and then we will do questions afterwards.
Good evening. Good evening. We're working. Thank you. My name's John Robson. I'm standing for Mayor, and I'm also standing for the Bethlehem Ward. One of the sort of foundational arguments that the people Garth talked about, that small elite who've been effectively controlling our city for a long time, is that rates were kept low by previous councils. Now, Tauranga's residential rates are amongst the highest in the country. So that clearly cannot be true. It cannot be true that councillors kept the residential rates down if those residential rates are amongst the highest in the country. That's an interesting place to start talking about numbers. Now, some of you have seen some of this presentation before, but there are some new slides, and I hope you find them entertaining. My name's John Robson. I'm a 3-time councillor. Each time I was on council, the mayors that I worked with, 3 of them, Stuart Crosby, Gregory Brownless, hi Greg, and Demby Powell, who's not here for all sorts of reasons, I imagine. Each time with those 3 mayors, my peers put me in the financial role. So I chaired Finance and Risk, Finance Audit and Risk. I was the senior position in Strategy, Finance and Risk Committee. Prior to being on council, I was retired. Prior to being retired, I was a management consultant. And management consultants have 2 necessary skill sets. One is about relationships, because you're not in a corporate situation. You have no line authority. The only way you get to be effective is by building relationships and bringing reason to situations. That's what you're brought in for. This gentleman is one of your commissioners. This is a gentleman called Bill Wasley. Now, Bill Wasley was in the Bay of Plenty Business News this week, an article. Normally you'd expect to see Anne Tolley there, but she's probably in the UK working on her cottage in Sussex. And of course, if you paid an enormous sum of money for 3 years, you can probably afford to treat yourself to a cottage in Sussex, if you're so inclined. Bill Wasley, in this article, talked about the Commission having a fair measure of success. Fair measure of success were his words in regard to the brief they had here at Tauranga City. Part of the brief was to restore trust and confidence. That was a very explicit part of the brief given to the Commission. What you see here is the net scores for the Commission over the last 3 years, and prior to that, Demby Powell, and prior to that, Mayor Gregory Brownless, who actually had a positive net score in terms of image and reputation. For some reason, Bill Wasley seems to think that what you see on that chart is a fair measure of success. Right? Bill's idea of a fair measure of success is very different to mine. Another thing Bill says in the article is part of their brief was to make decisions on behalf of the community. Except the trouble is that the long-term plan that they signed off was not consulted with the community. They consulted on a draft plan, but that draft plan had a increase in rates requirement of 76%. The plan they signed off had an increase in rates requirement of 164%, not the same plan. The plan they consulted on had capex of 3.4 billion. The plan they signed off had capex of 4.9 billion. The plan they signed off was not the plan they consulted on. The plan they consulted on did not have three waters in it, even though that consultation happened after the election and it was very clear that three waters needed to be included in council plans. The plan they signed off did have three waters in, but there was a problem because the 3.4 billion in the draft plan plus 1.8 billion for three waters gave a total of 5.2 billion, which effectively pushed the council beyond its borrowing limits. So they needed to find circa $300 million to get down inside their borrowing limits. So what they did is in the draft plan, they had Tauranga's most important roading project in there. Garth's already spoken of it. Nearly $300 million. Well, wasn't that handy? Because they were looking to find $300 million savings. So they took out of the final plan near enough to $300 million that was going to address Tauranga's most important roading project. Fair measure of success, an unconsulted long-term plan, not in my books. So if the long-term plan isn't there serving the people, who's it serving? So, Bay of Plenty business news this week. That building you see in the centre of shot there is for sale. If any of you are interested, you may recognise it, so I think it's in Spring Street. This is what it says in the spiel under the picture. And they talk about the transformation that's happening in the city, in the CBD. Who are the beneficiaries of that transformation? Well, here it is in red and white. This transformation could deliver a steady appreciation of property values in the area. Okay, so clearly the transformation in the eyes of the property sector here is going to benefit those people who own commercial property in the heart of the city. Hands up all of you here who own large amounts of commercial property in the centre of the city. Okay, so you're not the beneficiaries of this plan then. Another comment that Bill makes in his article in the Bay of Plenty Business News is the LTP is a realistic roadmap. So now what I want to do is talk a little bit about this long-term plan. The chart you see up here, and this chart was originally produced by Glenn Crowther, and frankly, if you're in the Mātua Otamotai electorate, vote for him. Because this is a chart that was not produced by your council. You won't find this chart in your long-term plan. The blue line represents the debt trajectory in the long-term plan. And what it does is it goes from about $1 billion now to a little over 2.6 billion in 2034. That's a massive increase in debt. However, in 2023, the then government changed the rules for councils and said, if you want to spend more money than the prudential limits allow, you can borrow money from somewhere else. The ratepayers will be liable for it, but you don't have to put it on your books. So just to be clear, the government passed an act, the IFFA, with the express purpose of allowing councils to borrow money that ratepayers would be liable for, but the council did not have to show it on its books. This council was the first under the Commission to take advantage of that opportunity, and over the course of the long-term plan, they will have borrowed, in addition to that 2.6 that they admit to, another $300 million. Hence, you add the green line to the blue line, and you get the red line. Our debt as a city will be $3 billion in 2034. It will have tripled or trebled, whichever you prefer. Now, big numbers, it's easy to get lost. What does it mean? How does it compare to other people? Well, just handily, I have a chart. And if you look at the blue line on the left, the blue column on the left, it tells you Tauranga's debt per capita in 2034. So we divide the debt in 2034 by the number of people in 2034, and that's our per capita debt. And what you can see is that Tauranga's debt will be 20% higher per capita than any other of those major cities. Now, the very observant amongst you will have noticed that Dunedin's not there. Now, Dunedin did something extraordinarily clever. There's been a lot of change between the two governments, particularly around the issue of Three Waters. So Dunedin said, we're not going to do a long-term plan until the dust settles. And I think that would have been a good choice for Tauranga. The red column represents Tauranga's 2.6 million debt plus the IFF. That figure is 40% higher per capita than any other major city in New Zealand in 2034. We will be 40% more indebted than any other major city per head. And now the bad news. Long-term plans are done every 3 years. And what you can do if you track back through history is you can say, what did we say 3 plans ago? What did we say 9 years ago was going to be the debt today? And what is the debt today? How good are these forecasts? Right, the bad news is they're not very good at all. But it's really easy to tell which side the error is because they always underestimate the level of debt. The smallest variance I can find, going back to 2012, over a 9-year period, is 48%. So what they said was going to happen 9 years out, the actual debt 9 years later was 48% higher than what they said it was 9 years previous. So, based on history, the numbers are going to be worse than that 3 billion. That's the pattern. And that's the smallest I could find. So I'm trying to be fair. Why do we have the level of debt? What causes our debt? Well, I think there's 3 obvious drivers. One is project budgeting, and again, Garth made some reference to this. In 2020, the democratically elected council was told that the Cameron Road project would cost $85 million. In 2024, the numbers are 1/3 of $1 billion, 330 million. Errors in budgets of that magnitude. And you know, that's a big number and a big project. But even small projects like the skate park went way over budget. That's one reason our debt's as high as it is. Another reason our debt's high and increasing is issues with operational management. So typically, a council is expected to bring in enough operating revenue to pay for operating expense. So the rates cover the staff and the interest and depreciation. What you shouldn't do is have a deficit budget. You know, your income should meet your outgoings, so you don't have to put things on the credit card. Council have a habit of doing deficit budgets. And this last year, just finished June 30, we don't know what the final figures are, but they budgeted to have a deficit of $50 million, which of course will go on your debt. Now that's bad enough, but as they were progressing through the year, they realised that they weren't going to have a $50 million deficit. They are likely to have an $80 million deficit. Right? So that's another $30 million on your debt. So they don't do project budgeting very well. They don't do operational management very well. And now I want to talk about policy implementation. There's been a phrase used in this city for years, and I remember when I first got on council in 2013, Stuart Crosby used to repeat the mantra, we have a policy that growth pays for growth. If you look at the growth CapEx, now there's three types of CapEx. CapEx is the money you spend on stuff that's going to be around for a while, buildings and pipes and libraries and whatever. There's three types of CapEx. One is replacement CapEx, normally funded by depreciation. The building's getting old, it needs replacing. That's replacement CapEx. The second type of CapEx is level of service CapEx. And it's something that improves the quality of life, the services offered to the current population. Yeah. The third type of CapEx is growth CapEx. And that's the CapEx you need because more people are coming here. Because developers are doing developments, they need pipes, they need roads. In the 6 years from 2018 to 2023, this council spent $500 million, $500 million on growth CapEx. And it got back in terms of development contributions and financial contributions from the development community, $200 million. Spent 5, got 2. Now, there's a shortfall of $300 million. Now, some of that they get from Waka Kotahi, who make a contribution to roads. But invariably, some of that shortfall winds up going on the backs of the current ratepayers. Right. So if you have a policy and you don't implement it, you will wind up with further burden. This issue is not uncommon in New Zealand, although Tauranga is one of the worst offenders. There's a legal firm, Simpson Grierson, and legal firms nowadays get involved in a lot of areas. They advise big corporates about things. They have to understand finance. Simpson Grierson does quite a bit of work with local government, so it has to understand local government finance. Simpson Grierson, earlier this year, put out a paper on funding in local government and made the point, why don't councils go harder on developers in terms of collecting more for the developments that those developers use to become extraordinarily rich? Right? So I don't know whether the commissioners read that paper. I did. I'm not certain the commissioners can read based on some of their work. What I did was I looked at the long-term plan going forward. So we've looked at the situation in recent history, looked at the long-term plan going forward and said, what are they budgeting in the long-term plan for growth CapEx? And what are they budgeting to get back from the developers? And there are the numbers there. And I've already seen eyes lighting up all over the room. You've already done the numbers. But just for those 2 people that haven't, the red line represents 1.8 billion in growth CapEx. And the green line is just north of 400 million in development contributions and financial contributions. Let's look at the numbers a different way. In the last 6 years, we were collecting 40% of our growth CapEx back in development contributions and financial contributions. Going forward, we're planning to collect just over 20%. So if they read Simpson Grierson's paper, they clearly didn't understand it. Now, when you look at this, it should come as no surprise that at the recent cocktail party for the Commission, funded by their own admission, at least in part by developers, the work of the Commission has been celebrated. And if you want to understand why the developers are celebrating the work of the Commission, I think here you can see 1.4 billion very good reasons. That's a good return on some cocktails and a few quiet conversations. Enough about debt. In 10 years' time, 40% higher than any other major city in the country, per capita. Let's talk about the rates requirement. So the rates requirement this last financial year was 290 million. In 10 years' time, in 2034, it will be roughly 780 million. That's a factor of 2.64. That's an increase of 164%. There was a recent situation at I think it's in the ballot meeting somewhere in the Arataki ward, when one of the candidates, and I know the story to this, one of the candidates had been talking to some colleagues, some friends, some political acquaintances, and they collectively thought, they hadn't read the long-term plan, they thought 164% cannot be right. Someone's made a mistake. It must be 64%. They were wrong. They should have read the long-term plan before they spoke out at that meeting. And just to make it clear, Rick Kurak, who's standing in Arataki, was not the candidate that made that error. Rick can count. He has experience. Adrian wasn't the person that made that mistake. If you're interested, they may be able to tell you. They may remember. 164% increase in the rates requirement. Now, what's interesting about the rates requirement is, as with debt, the predictions on the size of the rates requirement 10 years out have invariably understated things. The good news is, the smallest error I can find is only 25%. Not good news, but better than the debt situation. Now, when we start with a rates requirement, we have to adjust for growth. And you'll often hear people say, who are pro the long-term plan, yes, the 164, you have to adjust for growth, and you do. You also have to adjust for the differential. That's the balance of where the rates are being drawn from, whether they're being drawn from the residential ratepayer, commercial ratepayers, or the new industrial category. Those people, when they do their analysis, won't mention that you then have to put back in the IFF number. And what they really won't admit to is you should really correct for the historical underestimation. Again, these numbers don't mean a lot without a context. So, let's think about a single superannuitant living in the mountain, smaller than average property, smaller than average land, smaller than average building, paying rates at the moment of $3,350. At the moment, their rates account for 12% of their income, 12%. If we adjust for growth and the differential and the IFF, but no one's going to debate those numbers, their rates burden will become 22% of their income in 2034. 12% of their income today, 22% of their income in 2034. And that's before they paid for water and before they paid their regional council rates. My view is that people are going to be rated out of their homes. But there's a person running in the Te Papa ward called Andrew Kai. He's also running for the mayoralty. And he is adamant that the numbers I'm quoting, based on the long-term plan, are fear-mongering And he has made a statement that people are not going to be rated out of their homes. And just today, in front of an audience of Aquinas College students, he said that the reason he knows that is because that the council staff are clever and understand what they're doing, and that would never happen. Well, I've got news for Andrew, and it's all bad. Radio New Zealand today has an article. You can go and look it up. And the headline on that article, on the website, is "Homeowners may be forced to sell if rates rise." And that quote is taken from a report from council staff to New Plymouth District Council. The rates rises they're talking about are the rates rises in their LTP. The rates rises they're talking about across the LTP are lower, significantly lower, than the rates rises here in Tauranga. Andrew Kai is not an analyst, he's a physiotherapist. And I'm sure if I had something wrong with my back, I'd be comfortable going to Andrew Kai. But when council staff contradict him, he has a problem. Now, the interesting thing is, if the council staff at New Plymouth District Council are prepared to say this publicly, why aren't the Tauranga City Council staff prepared to say this publicly? Remember, the situation in Tauranga is worse than the situation in New Plymouth. The rates rises in Tauranga are worse than the rates rises in New Plymouth. My analysis shows the burden on that single superannuitant will rate them out of their home. But we have candidates confidently stating that I am fear-mongering. I, along with the New Plymouth District Council staff, respectfully disagree. The reaction of another candidate, this is a person standing in, I think, Matua Otamotai, possibly, and also standing for mayor. It's interesting that people might stand for mayor who have never had any experience on council before. You know, you can do it. You know, I did it first time round, but you need to have done your homework. To be fair to Tanya Bamford-King, her analysis on the burden on a single superannuitant, superannuitant, was very similar to mine. And she does claim to be an analyst, and that's fair enough. But the last line of a recent post basically commented that what's the problem, really? If superannuitants lived 2.5 per dwelling, then the rates wouldn't be an issue for them. Just think that through. Just think that through, right? Here's someone who understands numbers. It's true. If you have 5 superannuitants and they sold 3 of the houses and they moved into 2 of the houses, then clearly the rates per superannuitant would be less. I'm not going to reveal the name of the person I spoke to about this, right? But I will say a couple of things. The person I spoke to is an expert in the area of gerontology, dealing with aged communities. And Tauranga is really important here because our community is ageing. Even though we're growing, although our growth is actually slowing, we're ageing. The word she used to describe Tanya Bamford-King's response, arithmetic response to a very human condition, was inhuman. I use a different word. Our eldest has recently finished a law degree at Victoria, and one of the words they came across in their studies was the word unconscionable. Unconscionable just means, you know, beyond morality, just not acceptable. It's often used in discussions around contracts. I believe that that long-term plan and the impact it will have on the people, and not just single superannuitants, but everyone on fixed incomes, who's only going to get a 23% increase, give or take a bit, over the next 10 years. That burden's going to increase in the same ratio. Those double income families that are already struggling, that burden's going to increase. I believe this long-term plan, that debt, those rates, is unconscionable. And that's why I stand with Garth. The morality of how it was created, the morality of its impact, we both stand for repealing and replacing the long-term plan. If you have a heart, it is unconscionable. If you have a brain, it's unsustainable. You can't keep increasing rates like that. What we need is a new plan. The good news is there is a process for doing this. So in the Local Government Act, you can do what's called a long-term plan amendment. And actually the Commission did this in 2022. They came in, they introduced a long-term plan, a 21-31 long-term plan. They've been around long enough to do two of them. You can do a long-term plan amendment. So the process is there, the possibility is there. You just need to elect a council who's prepared to do it. The thing about this plan, for me, and I'm channeling Abraham Lincoln here, for those of you who sort of recognise it a bit, that plan needs to be of the community, by the community, for the community. Not for those people who own property on Spring Street, who are trying to sell already that property on the basis of the increase in their property values. The good news is, Abraham Lincoln had to go through a civil war, but we don't. We have democracy. Now, typically, there's a few extra slides for those of you who have seen this before, and typically this is where I end. And then immediately, when we start taking questions, someone says, who should we vote for? Well, someone sent me an email this afternoon. Some of these slides were done this afternoon. And I'm not 100% certain, but I'm going to put it up because it's kind of fun. I was sent a copy of a piece of paper, handwritten, on which was inscribed the following words: for Mahi Drysdale Mayor, for Bethlehem, Kevin Herb Schuler, for Matua Otamotai, Tembi Powell. I sort of recognise the handwriting. Mount Maunganui, vote for Jen Schooler, Heidi Hughes. Papamoa, vote for Marka Nelson or Rhea Hall. Te Papa, vote for Terry Malloy or Rod Taylor. Arataki, vote for Kim Renshaw or Adrian Pearce. I see Adrian's here.
I made the list.
You may want to comment. For Tauriko, vote for Larry Baldock. And in Welcome Bay, vote for Hotapu Baker and Cameron Templer. Now, on that handwritten note, which I've been given to understand was written by Tembi Powell, and perhaps forgotten from Matua last night, there was also a list of names he was against. Now, to protect the innocent, I've hidden some of those names. But there's one name at the top of his list, and I'm proud to be there. Proud to be there. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, thank you. Minor technical hitch, but we had a spare battery. We had a plan B, battery plan. Right, happy to take questions from the floor, but a couple of rules. We only want to talk about what we presented on. We're not here to talk about other issues, right? Just to be clear. So we often get people who want to talk about something outside this presentation, and if people want to have those conversations, they're welcome to. The other rule is, please have a question. We haven't hired the venue so you can make a speech. Okay? A question on topic. Seems fair? Yes.
How difficult is it to make an amendment to the long-term plan?
It requires an investment of staff time. My personal view is that what should happen is what happened in Auckland. Because often what happens with these plans when they're created is you're given topics individually and you can't tell how your decisions are going to add up. And what Wayne Brown did and the Auckland Council did is they went to the community with basically 3 plans, sort of low, medium and high, and said, this plan, you pay less, you get less. This plan, you pay X, you get X. This plan, you pay more, you get more. Right? None of this magic stuff that you often hear from politicians about, I can do more for less, because that magic doesn't work in the real world. So it requires an investment in staff time. But Tauranga City Council is not short of staff, just so we're clear. Question? Yes.
With the new development in Tauranga, where there's supposed to be about 6,000 people moving, surely that would bring the per capita amount down.
No.
The forecast numbers are already included, right? So when I did the per capita calculation, it wasn't I took the 2034 debt and divided it by the 2024 population. Inside the long-term plan, it tells you what they believe the population will be at that point. So I divided the 2034 debt by the 2034 population. That includes any population increase. To do anything other than that would be dishonest. And I pride myself on not playing games with numbers. Yes, sir.
John Dennis Barrington. I hope this is related enough. One of my concerns is how's the new council going to instill faith back in people that we see all this money wasted time and time again. The car park's an example, skate park's another example, and there's no accountability. It just constantly happens, project after project, and we see numbers published in papers and reports, and we don't believe them anymore because we don't have faith, and we haven't had faith for a long time in our councils to deliver projects anywhere near what they say they're going to come out at. So, I think that's an issue that's got to be addressed as well, because that leads to some of the history of the debt that we're incurring, and we're getting nothing for it, or we've achieved nothing for it.
I mean, you're on target. That was actually referred to, wasn't it? Project management, project budgeting was actually on one of the slides, so perfect question, on topic. One of the observations I make is councils are actually surprisingly powerful if they understand their power and know how to use it. Right? But I also make the observation, and this can sound a little elitist, and it's not supposed to. If you line up the senior management of Tauranga City Council, and then you line up your councillors, generally speaking, the senior management are better educated, more experienced, harder working, quite frankly, than their councillors. And I don't think Tauranga's been well served by the people they've elected over the years, by majority, right? And it's a hard issue to address, because when you look up at what the remuneration is, and you look at some of those senior staff on 200, 300, the chief executive on over $500,000 a year, why would those poachers go to the other side for $130,000 a year? There's a natural imbalance there. So you've got to look very hard at the councillors you elect. And it is difficult. You've all got the little book by now, 150 words, normally written by the councillor or their mother, right? Very favourable, best picture they've had, right? You've got to spend a lot more time on choosing your councillor than you spend choosing your Friday night pizza. And it's hard. Where do you get that information? The media don't give you much. You go to meetings that are organised and people get 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute sound bites. One of the reasons Garth and I put this together is some of these topics require a degree of explanation that your media won't give you, your council won't give you, and those people seeking your office would be reluctant to, give you, and may be unable to give you. All I can say is invest the sort of time in picking your councillor that you'd invest in any other $500,000 decision. And remember, every councillor that's elected, declared elected, on the afternoon of the 20th of July, will, over the next 4 and a bit years, get paid $550,000. $130,000 a year on average. $550,000 over the term. Right? This is a bit more than your average plumber. Right? $550,000. Please just put the effort in. Talk to people, ask questions of people that know, ask questions of the candidates themselves. Invest time and energy, because you need to get a decent return on that $500,000. And the damage those people can do is already clear. And it's in cities up and down the country. Look what's happening in Wellington. Look what's happening in Wellington, where the chief executive in Wellington told councillors that they couldn't have certain information, and it required the intervention of the Minister of Local Government telling the chief executive in Wellington, on the management side, that councillors are entitled to these things. Just a little anecdote about the previous councillor and the review and observer team that Garth referred to earlier. The person that headed that review and observer team was a chap called Peter Winder. And if you've been following his career, you realise that he crashed and burned at Tauranga. But one of the statements he made in his report was that councillors should not challenge staff because staff are subject matter experts. Now, I would contrast that advice from Peter Winder, who, I don't know whether you know, but crashed and burned at Tauranga. I would contrast that advice with the advice of the Auditor General to the councillors in Hamilton after they royally screwed up over the supercars fiasco. And his advice, the Auditor General, advice to the councillors of Hamilton, is you ask questions until you understand, because you are accountable. As Jenny Shipley found out with Mainzeal, that blaming the management no longer gets you off the hook. Right? And here, don't let your councillors off the hook. Right? If they have the skills and they work together, they can get the information they need, and they have the power to make the chief executive accountable. But you need to get councillors of that quality. And the trouble is, too many of them get on, realise they've bitten off far more than they can chew, right? And default to deferring to staff, because that's safer than admitting that they're out of their depth and resigning and giving up $500,000 in income that you've just given them over the next 4 and a bit years. Any more questions? Yes.
I'm Barbara Turley, I'm standing for Te Papa Ward. I'd just like to say that yes, you've got to choose your councillors properly, but the problem is they're not being honest in this election. They're not saying that they're backed by the Urban Task Force and Priority 1. They're not letting us know that. You have to find that out in between talking to people. So just be aware that not everyone standing is being honest.
We can't read that.
You're welcome to come up and look more closely at that. At the end, I'll leave that slide up for as long as you want it up. Any more questions? Yes, sorry.
Why do you think it seems to be so often, as you've highlighted, both of you, that what is said to be the cost of such and such, and then it balloons out to be several times more? There's probably lots of reasons, but can you say why that might be?
It's quite simply, I think, because the councillors who sign things off too early. So often they get a project suggested to them by an outsider and it comes through staff to a point. And what they look at is often a P50, what's called a P50 budget. So it's got a high level of error in it. There's 50% chance it's high, 50% chance it's lower than what it is. It's a long way away. you know, it's very inaccurate. And often they make a political commitment at that point without doing their homework, without fully understanding the implications of what they're doing. And then as it goes through a process of getting more refined costings, they're reluctant to admit that the costs will increase. And there's a pattern of it across the country. Now, it's not hard to refuse to commit until you've got a guaranteed price. I mean, how many people here would sign up to buying a new house or getting a mortgage if someone said, well, there's a chance that the price can be 50% higher or 50% lower? And if you're dealing with someone who's in control of the price, which side do you think it's going to wind up on? And just to give you an idea of how crazy council decisions can be, and Steve can talk to this. Talk to Steve Morris, he's another good person to consider voting for down there in Papamoa. Right? In 2018, by majority, your councillors signed up to a partnering agreement with a company called Willis Bond. And what that agreement basically said, and I kid you not, that everything above the ground, north of 11th Avenue, that the City Council would do for the next 11 years, Willis Bond got first dibs. Greg Brownless can speak to this because he voted against it as well. It was crazy then, it's even crazier now. But now you see the results because those cranes, they're LT McGuinness and Willis Bond like that. Why would we sign a contract like that? And that's a whole other story. But it's a bit like the story that Garth told. Very similar. The problem is you've got people, councillors, who have no real commercial experience, right? Who commit too early for political advantage and then won't back off. And you wind up carrying the burden. Maureen.
John, can I just...
John, have you any knowledge of how many contracts into the long-term plan have been signed off by the commissioners? How many are sitting there waiting to make all of the councillors fall into the trap?
We don't have that information. They're not giving us that information. The only way you can get that information is elect councillors who are prepared to share it with the public. And I'll just hand over to Garth.
Just going back to that last question, there's also another issue with the contracts. And that is, if I'm successful getting on the council, I'll be wanting and pushing for council contracts to have penalty clauses in them so that if a job is not done in a timely manner, then the contractor will pay a penalty per day back to the council.
Well, yes, Adrian.
Hello, I'm Adrian Pearce, I'm standing Arataki Ward. I just have to say, in my defence, I have no idea why I'm on that list. I've not spoken to Tembi Powell on my children's lives, so maybe they just think I'm good. I would ask, John, are you supporting any woman in any of the wards?
Oh, come on.
It's not John's list.
I mean, there are a number of great councillors that you're kind of supporting tonight, or I get that feeling?
No, what I has made reference to people who have had experience of the history that we've been through. That's why they were picked. I picked Steve in relation to what happened in Willis Bond, Rick in relation to what happened, Greg, who was there for the Willis Bond thing, so that's why I picked those people out. There are no, as far as I can see, female councillors from that period here. That's why these people have been identified.
Okay.
Yeah? And what I haven't done is I haven't put up a list of who I think people should vote for. I've stayed away from that space tonight because I've tried to focus on getting the information across. But that's okay.
Can I? Yeah, I'm not here to push for any particular other people at all. The point of what we've been doing in these meetings is saying to the public, you know, you need to do your due diligence on candidates. Now, clearly, people who are backed by the Urban Task Force, that's for you to decide. I mean, many of you will be aware, of course, that Doug Owens has outed his nephew, Mahi Drysdale, as an Urban Task Force mayoral candidate who was tapped on the shoulder by Scott Adams. That's in a video, and it's on the social media and also been the front page of the paper. But we have kept away from, you know, saying who you should or should not vote for, and I'm certainly not going to do that. That's entirely up to you. But the point of all of these lectures is, it is our belief that you should, in your interests, vote for people who are going to repeal and replace the long-term plan. And the mechanism for doing that will be the amendment mechanism. But that's just a mechanism. The reason we don't say amend the long-term plan is because it sounds like we're talking about minor changes. But we're not talking about minor changes at all. We're talking about making major changes. So you need to do your own due diligence about who you want to vote for. But certainly the two of us stand for repeal and replace the long-term plan.
So do I. And me.
There you go. So that's Adrian Pearce in Arataki. Barbara Turley in Te Papa. Yes, sir, you at the back.
You talked about people, the council not charging enough for development to developers. That happened to me. I developed a little bit at the Mount and a little bit in Hamilton, and we did a section split, proposed section split on Ocean Beach Road, and the council, done by some guru person downtown, and the fee for the section was like $2,000 or something like that. And I said to the guru person, surely it's like 30,000 or 40,000 or something. No, 2 is it. I do them over in Hamilton, like $30,000 or $40,000 you pay the council to give you the right, I suppose, to create a section. Whereas here at the Mount, like $2,000. I thought, why so little? I thought, to have the chance, you're chopping off a section, you're going to sell for like $500,000 or $600,000. I mean, straight away they could have got $30,000 or $40,000, but they only wanted 2.
I mean, this has been an issue here. The thing about development contributions in Tauranga is unique in how it collects them compared to the other cities. So in other cities, development contributions, as I say, a contribution from the developer to pay for infrastructure that's going to be required by the development. In other cities, they're typically picked up at the point of land subdivision. The costs are put on the developer. Here in Tauranga, we put some costs on the developer, and the balance of costs is put on your building consent, which is why when you get a building consent here in Tauranga, it's much more expensive than Hamilton. Now, what research out of Auckland has shown, academic research, and the Tauranga experience has shown, is the Tauranga way of collecting development contributions results in higher land prices, larger developer profits, higher building costs, and a greater burden on the ratepayer. The question is, why has Tauranga stuck with that process for so long? And my argument would be that you have repeatedly elected by majority councils by majority who have either not understood that or have been comfortable with it. You have elected councillors on occasion who have had their entire election expenses funded by the development community. You have elected councillors who are active in development. Turkeys and developers, you know, they don't vote against their own interests. Questions?
So can I just go?
Sorry.
So I guess from what John's saying is that you might want to consider when you vote too that you don't vote for people who are directly or indirectly involved in development.
Leading on from the other question about what about contracts that you don't know about have actually maybe been signed very quickly before all of this happened. How is that going to impact your ability to repeal the long-term plan? Because some of those contracts are probably embedded in the long-term plan.
And that's why the point is that on arriving, a new council has to look at what's possible and go back to the community with some options. But when it comes to contracts, remember contracts can be bought out, and sometimes that's actually a smart thing to do. And the classic example of that is a chief executive who's a bit out of control. You're possibly better off paying them $500,000 to go away than you are letting them wreak hundreds of $millions worth of damage and staying in office. So it really is a simple financial calculation. But we can't talk about, and that's why we haven't talked about what needs to not happen, or what we haven't made promises, Garth or I, about what's not going to happen, because we don't know what's been signed up. But directionally, we know that a long-term plan with the fiscal envelopes of $3 million of debt, $3 billion of debt, and 164% increase in the rates requirement is just not financially sustainable. So what you do is you reduce the envelopes and you go to the chief executive and say, we want 3 plans that fit within inside this new fiscal envelope, or these 3 fiscal envelopes, and see what they produce. You challenge them, you challenge them, you challenge them, and you bring that to the community and say, to get it down, these are your options. Or of course you could stick with the current one if you're that way inclined.
Getting close to 8, we should pull it.
Right, any more? Yes, sir.
You talked about the extra 300 million. You mentioned that it would be, it's basically it's the ratepayers. So I've got 2 questions. One, who is the backer of that fund? And 2, if the council defaulted on that 300 million, who's burdened with the picking up that debt?
Okay, so the question for those of you who hadn't heard it is on the $300 million of IFF funding. Yeah, who is the money coming from, and what happens if there's a default? The money could be coming from anywhere. It could be coming from the New Zealand Super Fund. It can come from anywhere, and you know, so there's no particular person lined up for it. There's no, you know, it's an open market situation. Who's going to prepare to fund a loan? Now, the great things about it is, if you're a person thinking about lending to council, is council will pay you more interest on your funding than they'll pay the LGFA, who funds the rest of it. So, looking at it from the ratepayer's perspective, IFF funding is more expensive than the other funding. It is also less flexible. So there's a bargain for you. With regard to default, the default situation in New Zealand is really simple. And when you look at credit rating agencies, the people talk about Standard & Poor's or Fitch, wherever it is, and they talk about people who've got ratings, you hear them B++, A+, whatever, A-. These are not comments on how good the management is. They're not comments on how good the business is. They're comments on how likely you are to lose money if you lend it to that organisation. And to give you an example of what happens in New Zealand when things go wrong in councils, you've only got to look at Kaipara. And in Kaipara, the councillors of the day made mistakes that were effectively illegal. And what the government did is it applied retrospective legislation that meant even though the decisions were probably ultra vires, you know, the ratepayers still had to pay. The ratepayers are always the backstop for councils, which is why the LGFA put prudential limits on, and why a government that allows councils to go around those prudential limits is clearly not a government that understands money. Right, we've reached 8 o'clock, we're conscious of time. Has anyone got a burning question? I mean, I'm happy to stay here, but I don't want to hold people up. Yes, sir. Burning question.
Well, it's not so much a question as just a comment, and I understand why you wouldn't want to tell us who we should vote for. But I think we'd sit here and go, we've had a dysfunctional council. You could argue either way, whatever you like. And I guess I'd sit here and think I'd really like to kind of know who you would work with so that we'd end up with a functional council. It's just a way that I'd sort of look at it as opposed to telling us who to vote for. Does that make sense?
I think it's a really good question, and the short answer is that Section 41A, 1A of the Local Government Act tells you the role of the Mayor. And it tells you the Mayor has no executive power. And advice from Local Government New Zealand during this election was that a Mayor who is dictatorial, divisive or distant will not work effectively. Now the mayoral role is tough because as the Mayor you have to represent the democratic position of your councillors. And if that's against your personal position, you have to be professional enough not to turn it into, I'm trying to think of the technical term, a shit fight. Right? So the most it's really important that you elect a mayor who's a Democrat, who respects the democratic process. Now, Greg speaks to this, right? Greg's experience is for the first 18 months that he was on council, then there was a by-election, but for the first 18 months Greg was on council, he was, if you like, almost in a minority on certain big issues, right? But he didn't throw his toys out the pram. He didn't get abusive. He didn't call people softcocks and Judases and traitors.
Like somebody else.
He didn't accuse people. He didn't personally attack people. He respected the democratic process. He maintained a professional demeanour, and that council went through a whole term. You're trying to judge the personality of people, but you want people who respect the democratic process. And people who are backed by people who don't respect the democratic process, who are prepared to remove a vote to get their own way, I would suggest you've got to ask a question about those people. Does that provide some guidance? Look, we've reached the end of our time. Thank you for coming. It's a cold night. It's dark outside. Thank you for finding your way here. Good luck.